Hey, welcome to Biology by Bradford. This week we're going to talk about the menstrual cycle. Now, topic D3.1, reproduction, is quite big. I'm not going to talk through all of it in this video. I just want to home in on something that a lot of my students come stuck with, which is the menstrual cycle. And it's interesting to start by thinking like how many hormones actually regulate the cycle. And I find more often than not, people don't really have a full appreciation that there are four hormones that are helping with this process. Two helping deal with the release of the egg, and two that help with preparing the uterus lining. Now, often there's lots of diagrams like this, which I kind of personally find quite confusing. And it's because they have time along the x axis. So if you look here, we're looking at how different things change, like the endometrial wall or the uterus lining. So we can use those terms kind of interchangeably. The uterus lining is what thickens with blood, prepares the womb or the uterus for the receiving a fertilized egg. And then we've got the levels of different hormones. Here's our four hormones in the different bars or different lines, showing how their concentrations change over time. And the other thing that they're affecting, so these two, estrogen and progesterone, are affecting the uterus. And LH and FSH, which are released from the pituitary gland in the brain, they are affecting the development of an egg. Now, I find this personally a little bit confusing, and it is something to appreciate. But if you're thinking, I just want to do really well in the exam questions and I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my points there, like the way that the questions get asked are things like explain the roles of specific hormones in the menstrual cycle, including positive and negative feedback, or outline the roles of hormones in the menstrual cycle. So, a good colleague of mine um, showed me this diagram that she utilizes. And this is something that is now like the holy grail of the menstrual cycle that I use. And of course, I've like blitzed it up a little bit here, but ultimately you can just put like, if you're in an exam, you'll just write out FELP. And that's what we call it, the FELP diagram, because of, as you can see, like this would be the simplest way to have it. FLEP, FELP diagram. You write it around FELP. And the gray lines are showing the positive feedback and the red lines are showing the negative feedback. So this is the more complex version. And this is the one that I utilize in class. And I also think about four things whenever I'm working my way. Now, if you can just get the FELP diagram down, then you're going to remember the names of the hormones. You're going to remember some of the positive and negative feedback, and you're going to score well in the question. But to like utilize this to the best of your ability, you're talking about using some certain language, like promote when we're talking about positive feedback, or inhibit when we're talking about a negative feedback. So, positive feedback is one thing where it influences another and it causes an increase. The classic example is when we think about like a baby that's going to be born, it kicks against the uterus lining, and the uterus lining then constricts back against it, and then it kicks harder. And what's controlling that is the release of oxytocin. And oxytocin is causing the uterus to constrict, it's pushing against the baby, and the baby pushes back, and then the levels of that hormone increase. And that's what when we talk about how close are your contractions, they get closer and closer and closer as the amount of oxytocin is increasing. Now here, we're not, that's actually a higher level topic as well, but it's one that we all know and we can all relate to. But a negative feedback is where it keeps something within a set parameters. So like a predator-prey relationship, that how like the amount of foxes increases and the amount of rabbits then decrease, and how then because the rabbits have decreased, now some of the foxes die off, and it's keeping things within a set parameter, like your temperature as well. Like you get too hot, you start sweating to cool yourself down. You get too cold, you start shivering to warm yourself up, and it's keeping your temperature around 35.5 degrees. So that's a negative feedback. So let's just walk through this diagram. Now, we start here at number one. FSH promotes the production of estrogen. It is produced in the pituitary gland, and it causes a follicle to develop. So we call it, there's a little tickly fish here because it's follicle stimulating hormone. And it's going to promote the production. So it causes a follicle to start developing in the ovary, and it causes the production of estrogen. So estrogen is produced in the ovary and it builds up the uterus lining, inhibits the production of FSH, and then promotes the production of LH. So LH, or luteinizing hormone, is enough to write FSH or LH. LH is produced in the pituitary gland. It causes the release of an egg around day 14 when the levels are high. So when we see a graph, we see a spike, like we see a spike here in LH when the egg is released. So here we got a hot air balloon releasing an egg, and it's a Cadbury's cream egg air balloon to kind of, the sillier the better sometimes to remember these things. And LH is going to promote the production of progesterone. And progesterone is produced in the ovary, in particular the structure called the corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum is, and you can see it better in this diagram here, the corpus luteum is where the egg was released from, and that leftover follicle starts releasing progesterone. And progesterone inhibits the production of LH and inhibits the production of FSH. Now, the reason being is you don't want more eggs to be produced. Like, one egg has already been released, and if that has been fertilized, then we have an extra step, which is like a higher level detail where that zygote that has started dividing and has become a blastocyst, that's going to release a hormone called HCG, which is directly affects the corpus luteum in the ovary and tells it to keep producing progesterone, because the role of progesterone is to maintain the endometrial lining, that thick layer of blood, and to stop any miscarry there. So this is absolutely critical, this diagram, to help you remember the different steps. So you go from, so we'll talk it through one more time. Follicle stimulating hormone is produced in the pituitary gland. It promotes the production of estrogen. Estrogen is produced in the ovary, and its role is to build up the endometrial lining. It promotes the production of luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone will trigger an egg to release around day 14 when levels are high. It promotes the production of progesterone. Progesterone is released from the corpus luteum in the ovary, and its role is to maintain the uterus lining. It has a negative feedback where it inhibits the production of FSH and LH. So once you've gone through this and you've practiced writing it out, what I'd like you to do afterwards, and the link is below, is I've got 10 practice questions. So you can find lots of different ones as well for other topics on my Biology by Bradford site. They're there for students and teachers alike. And they are what I'm calling a web sheet. So it's just a HTML file, which means a static web page. And what's cool about this, which is even better than a worksheet, is that you can see they're interactive and it will tell you why. So here's just 10 practice questions looking at the key things that you should take away from this diagram. And what is a nice way to approach doing this is to draw out the diagram and then to try the questions. So yeah, let me know how you get on. Let me know if you found those questions useful, if this video helps you prepare for a test, and what you'd like to see more of in the future. So please remember to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. All right, ciao for now.